Welcome back to another episode of Ask the Expert, a show that breaks down the science of bleeding disorders in a way that's clear and simple. I'm your host, Amy Board, and today we're putting this vehicle into high gear, hurdling some big topics like hemostasis and current treatments. But don't worry, I'll make it easy to understand and hopefully a little fun. We'll be right back.
#MyHemophilia_Truth. Real stories powered by Sanofi. It's time to consider the whole experience when it comes to managing hemophilia and change the conversation. Explore the full story at www.myhemophiliatruth.com.
Thanks for tuning in again, and I just want to thank our presenting sponsor, Sanofi, one more time. We couldn't do it without our partners there, and we are so grateful for the emphasis that you all put on educating the community. All right, y'all. Imagine your blood vessels are like roads in your neighborhood, and when one gets a crack, you need a repair crew to fix it. Basically, that's what hemostasis is. It's the body's repair crew swooping in to patch things up and stop the bleeding before anything spills out. I spoke with Dr. Patrick Ellsworth and Dr. Ben Samuelson-Jones about hemostasis, and as you can imagine, they absolutely love talking about this stuff.
When we talk about hemostasis rather than thrombosis, we mean the physiologic, normal, sort of healthy process of stopping bleeding wherever that bleeding is occurring. And, in hemophilia, we usually talk about a lot of bleeds being spontaneous, and they're probably not spontaneous in the sense that there's nothing that triggered it. It's just that it's something so small, just, a movement of a normal joint, maybe disrupting a teeny tiny capillary or blood vessel, that hemostasis normally would say like, yep, this is normal. There's just a little bit of tissue turnover. We're going to stop any bleeding here. But if you're completely missing, say, factor 8 or factor 9, the body can't stop.
In some ways, hematology is pretty simple. If you're missing something, you just put back what you're missing. And so if you're missing factor 8, you give back factor 8. And that's done now with either plasma-derived concentrates or factor 8 that you make in the lab, or factor 8 that you make in the lab that you bioengineer to make it last longer or work better. And same thing for factor 9. It's really easy to think about if you have a patient that's missing factor 8 and they're having a problem, then you just give them the factor 8 and you make that level normal.
So for clarification, normally the repair crew has all the tools that they need. But if you're missing something, like factor 8, they're suddenly trying to do their job without a wrench or a jackhammer. And that is when things can go wrong.
So if you've got hemophilia, you're missing one of the clot-making proteins. And when you do factor replacement therapy, you're basically just giving back the thing that's missing. So you're putting things back into balance by adding back something that you don't have enough of. So conceptually, that's super easy and it works really well. And we've been doing it for a very long time. And maybe to some degree that gave us a little bit of confidence that we were smarter than we thought. But adding back the thing that's missing is really the basis of factor replacement therapy. And that's what the name implies, right? Factor replacement therapy. You're replacing something that's missing. So when we come to these rebalancing therapies, it's sort of the opposite end of that, right? We're not replacing the thing that's missing to try to restore balance. We're taking away something that's on the other side of that balance to kind of bring things back into balance that way.
So factor replacement is like handing the crew the right tool that they've been missing. Once they got it, they can fix the damage and stop the bleeding properly. So what if instead of giving them the missing tool, we help the crew work smarter? That's kind of what these rebalancing therapies do. It's like a project manager stepping in to streamline the work, cutting unnecessary steps and making everything more efficient.
So instead of adding something back, we're taking something away. Actually, what we're doing is we're sort of inhibiting the action of, or the function of, some of these regulatory proteins. And it's sort of a simple concept. If you want to restore balance, you either add stuff that's missing from one side or you take away stuff that you've got too much of on the other side, then it should go back into balance. And conceptually, it does work that way. It's just that that's a really gross oversimplification of this super complicated system with a bunch of different moving parts, some of which we frankly don't fully understand. I mean, there are parts of the clotting system that we're still trying to figure out how they really work. I mean, we certainly know a lot more than we did 30 or 40 years ago, but there are definitely parts of the way the clotting system will work that are not completely fully worked out and understood. I think some of the things we learned in these clinical trials sort of like reminded us of that fact that there are some parts to this really complex system that we're still a little bit not completely certain on.
Right. It sounds simple, add or take away to get back in balance, but this system is complex. It's like trying to coordinate a giant road crew where not everyone's job is totally understood. But we've made progress, and we're still learning how every team member works together. Now, the body's clotting system is like the biggest construction crew you can imagine. There's so many different parts to it, and each worker plays a different role. But sometimes we don't always know how the workers all work together. It's like trying to coordinate a big team to fix a road, and there's still a lot of trial and error to figure out how everything fits together.
Which is cool. I mean, that's part of the fun of this, right? Is we're learning stuff still. Even after all these years, and we've been torturing medical students and teaching the clotting cascade for decades, but there's still parts of it that we don't totally understand how they work, which is super interesting.
Okay, I know it's unnerving to hear a physician say we don't totally know how they work, but that is just the reality of science and research. There are some parts of the clotting system that are like new team members we're still trying to figure out how to work with. It's like trying to build a highway and not having all the blueprints. So we've got some great workers, but we're still ironing out all the details about how everybody works together. But here's another way to picture it. When a road cracks, the first crew arrives with cones and caution tape. Basically, that's primary hemostasis. Your platelets and von Willebrand factor step in to temporarily stop traffic and to keep things safe. And then the second crew rolls in with the heavy machinery to actually fix the crack, and that is secondary hemostasis, or the clotting cascade. Your clotting factor's doing the deeper repair work to seal things up. Let's hear from Dr. Mark Redding to hear more.
Primary hemostasis is, as the name implies, it's the first thing that happens when you're trying to make a clot. And that involves some things called platelets, which are cells that circulate in the blood that kind of help start the clotting process. So in your blood, you got red cells that carry oxygen, you got white cells that fight infection, you got platelets that help start the clotting process. So primary hemostasis is platelets sticking together and sticking at the place where you're bleeding. So if you've got a blood vessel that's got a hole in it, platelets kind of form a plug where that hole is to initially get the bleeding to stop. It's like kind of putting a cork in it, so to speak. So that involves platelets and a protein called von Willebrand factor, which is a different type of bleeding disorder than hemophilia, which we may or may not get into. But von Willebrand factor is one of the things that helps platelets stick to the place where you need to make a clot. So that process of von Willebrand factor and platelets forming a plug, that's called primary hemostasis. In addition to forming that plug to initially stop the bleeding, the other really important part of primary hemostasis is that it provides the surface upon which secondary hemostasis has to happen.
Okay, so again, primary hemostasis is like the first crew on the scene. The crew are these platelets and von Willebrand factor putting up the signs and getting everybody to slow down. And then the second crew comes in with the big stuff to make sure that the road is actually fixed. And this is the clotting cascade, or secondary hemostasis.
Secondary hemostasis to come in and make a clot, to kind of cement that plug in place and really keep the bleeding stopped until the tissue underneath can heal. So it's two very different parts of the clotting system working together. And the reason we think about it in two different parts like that is because people that have problems with primary hemostasis have a different type of bleeding tendency and different types of bleeding patterns than people that have a problem with secondary hemostasis. So if you're missing a clotting protein like in hemophilia, you've got a problem with secondary hemostasis. Whereas if you're missing von Willebrand factor, or if you don't have enough platelets or your platelets don't work properly, you've got a problem with primary hemostasis. And the clinical things that we see, the types of bleeding and the patterns of bleeding, look fairly distinct depending on where the problem is. And so when we see a patient that has a suspected bleeding disorder, we spend a lot of time talking about what types of bleeding symptoms and the timing of when they bleed relative to when the challenge happened. And from all that information, we can kind of tease out whether we think the problem is more likely in primary hemostasis versus secondary hemostasis.
Now, let's say the repair crew gets a little too excited. Suddenly, they're not fixing just one crack. They're filling every pothole on the block, even the ones that don't need it. That is thrombosis, when your clotting system goes into overdrive and starts making clots where you don't need them.
If you clot too much, if you have too much hemostasis, pathologic clotting, that's called thrombosis. Okay, so hemostasis and thrombosis both describe clot making. Hemostasis is normal physiologic clot making. Thrombosis is pathologic excess clot making.
Now let's talk about another way to repair our clotting process. Imagine you've got the repair crew, but the crew is missing one important worker that has a very specific job, like driving the dump trucks to transport materials to the site. So the crew is missing this worker. Think of it like maybe missing a factor 8 or a factor 9. And instead of replacing this worker to do the job, we make a contraption that transports the materials, essentially doing the job that we need on our repair crew. This treatment class, called a monoclonal antibody, does just that.
It's not a rebalancing agent. It doesn't affect the balance like we've been talking about. It's called a factor 8 mimetic, so it mimics the action of factor 8. So factor 8's job in the clotting system is to bring activated factor 9 right next to factor 10 so that factor 10 gets activated. So factor 8 is kind of like a bridge, sort of like a docking protein that brings activated factor 9 next to factor 10. When that happens, factor 10 gets activated and then the clotting cascade keeps happening. So emicizumab is an antibody that's got kind of two arms to it. And one of them recognizes factor 9A or activated factor 9, and one of them recognizes factor 10. And so it kind of sticks those two proteins next to each other, just like factor 8 does. So it mimics the effect of factor 8. So it's a factor 8 mimetic. So really different. It doesn't do anything about restoring balance. It kind of, in essence, what it does, it's sort of like replacing factor 8, but it's not actually replacing the protein itself. It's replacing the function of factor 8.
So again, emicizumab acts like a new contraption, stepping in to help the crew to get the job done when factor 8 isn't available. And just like how a neighborhood can go from having a few potholes to a fully paved, well-maintained street, the way we treat bleeding disorders has evolved. We've gone from basic tools to high-tech repair solutions, giving our repair crew the best equipment to handle whatever comes their way.
All the factor replacement medicines that we've had prior to 2014, when the first of the extended half-life or the EHL factor products came around, all of the standard half-life products basically work the same. So the doses are the same, the dosing schedules are the same, the way they make your blood clots the same, the way the levels go up and come down, pretty much the same. Didn't matter which one you picked, they're all going to work the same. When the extended half-life factor products came out, the first ones of those came around in 2014, for the first time we had to sort of get our heads around the notion that, oh, these are not just the same as all the other ones before. They do work a little bit differently. The doses are a little bit different. The way we measure their levels, some of our lab tests work better for some versus others. So it started getting a little more complicated. And now as we move forward beyond factor into non-factor, so emicizumab or Hemlibra was the first one of those, that factor 8 mimetic. And now these rebalancing agents, now the complexity is getting much, much greater because the mechanisms of action, the way these drugs work are all very different. The way they're dosed is different. The number of milligrams, the number of times you have to give the medicine is different. And the effects on the way they make the clotting system work are different. How we would treat a breakthrough bleed if it were to happen, or how we were to manage someone going through surgery is going to be different depending on which of these specific medicines you're on. So it's getting much, much, much more complicated. And we can't think of all these drugs as all being the same anymore. They're all really unique and different. And that's going to make the sort of the clinical decision making much more complicated and the clinical use of these drugs much more complicated. So it used to be, years ago, if I got a call from the emergency room and a patient was in and like, oh, this is a guy with hemophilia A and he's bleeding. What do? I would say, oh, just give him this. And we knew it would work because all the drugs we had to pick from worked the same. Now that phone call is going to be a lot more complicated because I'm going to need to know which medicine is this person using, and that's going to have an impact on how I deal with an acute bleeding episode. And so I'm going to have a whole lot more information to understand how to safely manage that person. And that's going to be something we're going to have to just get used to. And it's going to take us a while. So I think the take home part of this is that the complexity of not only the decision making around which medicine to use, but the complexity of the things we have to think about when we're managing these patients in sort of acute situations like showing up in the ER or needing a surgery, that's going to get way more complicated. And it's going to require a lot of expertise and a lot of coordination between all the different people involved in caring for these patients to make sure we do it right.
Hemophilia A and B are both bleeding disorders. However, they have their own unique pathologies and clinical features. Preclinical studies have shown that after infusion, individuals have 3 times more factor 9 in the extravascular space than they do in the bloodstream. Due to the distinct behavior of factor 9, multiple pharmacokinetic or PK parameters should be considered when assessing the treatment and management of hemophilia B. So what does this mean for people with hemophilia? Visit the bigger picture in hemb.com. This site is intended for US HCPs only.
The treatments we have now are like the latest tech in construction, helping the repair crew do a more detailed and precise job. It's kind of like upgrading from a basic toolkit to a super high-tech construction zone where the crew can tackle anything. So whether you're using factor replacement or these rebalancing therapies or exploring gene therapy, it's like choosing the right tools for your crew. All of them are a part of the same mission, keeping your road smooth and moving forward. That's a wrap for today's episode. From the repair crew patching things up to the cutting-edge treatments that help them do their job better, we've explored how science is working to keep things running smoothly. Thanks for listening, and remember, whether it's a small crack or a big hole, it's all about making sure the system stays strong. Make sure to subscribe, share, and we'll see you next time on Ask the Expert. Did you know bloodstreammedia.com is your one-stop shop for all podcasts for the bleeding disorders and rare disease community? There you can find links to the Global Hemophilia Report and our flagship podcast, Bloodstream, with your hosts, me, and Patrick James Lynch. Also check out Flow, which is straight talk about extreme periods, and The Pain Pod, which is an in-depth storytelling odyssey of chronic pain. All this and more on bloodstreammedia.com, the #1 podcast network for rare disease. Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Or have a question that you would like to hear one of our experts answer? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream Media on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and all those social media channels. I am your host, Amy Board, and until next time, stay curious, my friends.